Okay, I think we're live. Just mic check. 1, 2. Still using the new headphones, so hopefully you all can hear me. I just want to add my 2 cents to the conversation about Yasser Qadi's disastrous interview with Mohammed Hijab. Although I don't know how much um, I don't know how many unique insights I can provide. It's been talked to death by tons of Christian apologists, tons of ex-Muslim channels like Abdullah Samir, who has a great YouTube channel. David Wood, of course, did several videos on this and several live streams. Even other Muslim apologists and Dawa channels like Mufti Abu Laith, who's actually pretty entertaining based on the video that I watched. Even he's mocked Yasser Qadi and Mohammed Hijab for essentially redacting over a half hour of this interview that was embarrassing both to Yasser Qadi and Mohammed Hijab, but more importantly, embarrassing to Islam. And it basically exposed the lack of fundamental logic inherent in Islam. Yasser Qadi used a great analogy. He unwittingly compared Islam to the naked emperor and the story The Emperor's New Clothes. So he made a comparison. He was essentially analyzing textual criticism of the Quran, and he was trying to explain to a very thick-headed Mohammed Hijab why you couldn't publicly defend the Quran in certain contexts, defend very problematic passages within certain contexts. And he said in the West, they have no respect for Islam. Here he was talking primarily about academics. I think he was overstating the case because there are a lot of apologists for Islam in academia. One of the foremost, of course, is John Esposito, but also Karen Armstrong, who is a former nun. Hi, Christine, who's a former nun, and she is sort of a new age defender of Islam, just like Gary Wills, very liberal Roman Catholic is. He actually wrote a book about the Quran, and one of the funniest parts about this book is the preface, where he essentially admits that the Quran is unreadable. And to that I say, he has a point. The Quran, when even the Quran's defenders, whether they be particularly from the West, when even their defenders of the Quran admit that it's incoherent and indecipherable, and I agree that it is, because I did an entire series, a surah by surah exegesis of the Quran, and I commented upon this repeatedly, how tedious, just the utter tedium it is to slog through the Quran. If I hadn't actually done that series, I probably never would have read the book in its entirety, because it's, in addition to being replete with factual errors, scientific, historical, scriptural, it's also simply one of the most repetitive, uh, just unpleasant books to read. It's really almost painful to make it through that book. But uh, but this is something that even defenders of the Quran, like Gary Wills, will admit. But yeah, people like him, Karen Armstrong, John Esposito. There are tons of Western academics and writers who will defend Islam and defend the Quran. So I think Yasir Qadhi's case is a little bit overstated, but he does have a point. Western, or at least traditionally Western academia viewed these religious texts with a critical eye, just like other historical texts. They would examine them and scrutinize them from the standpoint of someone who doesn't believe in the philosophy espoused. So you would have professors look at the Quran and analyze it. They used to be called Orientalists, and these were the people who were chiefly responsible for translating the Quran into the vernacular, into English, and thereby disseminating a greater knowledge of the Quran. Because up until that point, the only people who had any access to the Quran were Muslims, and not just ordinary Muslims, but Muslims, very muftis, people who had access to the Arabic texts and were literate in that language. But the much vilified Orientalists were the ones who actually translated these texts into the English language and into German and French and other European languages, thereby spreading knowledge of this very important ideology and its core text, which is the Quran, of course. So, hey, John. Yes, I got a clean look. I'm glad that some people still recognize me. But so yeah, these people and these Orientalists were chiefly responsible for increasing knowledge of the Quran outside of an Arabic context. So Yasir Qadhi's point, he does have a point in that regard, that particularly previous generations of academics would look at these texts and would scrutinize it. They would conduct textual analysis from the standpoint of someone who didn't believe in the quote-unquote truths contained in the Quran, whereas Muslims are told never to question. In fact, in the Quran, Muhammad condemns anyone who gainsays what he's who gainsays his assertions. So you're expected to just blindly accept whatever Muhammad and his companions have promulgated. You're supposed to just embrace it and not criticize it. And if you criticize it, that's a sign that you're that you're really not a true Muslim. And of course, when you're not a Muslim and you're criticizing the Quran, or you are a Muslim and you've fallen away, the penalty for that, for either apostasy or for simply critiquing the Quran or attacking the reputation of Muhammad, the penalty for that is death. And of course, you see thousands of deaths every single year from Muslims who are enforcing that penalty. Hi, Matthew. So Yasir Qadhi had a point there that they didn't look at the Quran, they don't look at the Ahadith, they don't look at the Sirat from the same perspective of Muslims, whether it be Muslim laymen or Muslim imams and muftis, who all are compelled to accept the Quran at face value. And the problem with this is there are so many glaring errors and demonstrably false things in the Quran that you can't look at it from a proper academic standpoint and can come to the conclusion that this was something God had a hand in creating. And this is why Yasir Qadhi, when he talks to Western audiences and is in academic settings, he does not discuss these very transparent falsehoods and errors in the Quran, he shies away because he's still kind of like Reza Aslan, although from a more conservative, you might say, perspective. He wants to maintain his reputation, such as it is, within academic settings. So he won't delve into these things. He won't address the variants, the thousands of variants in the Quran. This whole idea of kiryat or or uh, or varying versions of the Quran. Different. He won't address this whole idea of diacritical marks changing not just the inflection or the intonation, but the literal definition and meanings of words. He won't address that. And the funny part of one of the funniest parts of the Yasser Qadhi interview, aside from the fact that he was comparing Islam to the naked emperor in the Emperor's New Clothes, and the little child who points out the emperor's nudity to textual critics, to people who are not Muslims, who actually look at the Quran through an intellectual framework. The funniest part, aside from that rather frank admission, is is that Yasser Qadhi himself is just, I don't. It's kind of funny. I don't know how to put this, but the whole idea that you can he basically admitted that you would have to pay money to him. You would have to take one of his classes, and in order to understand kiryat, in order to understand this topic, the maruf, or kiryat, in order to understand these topics, you would have to essentially pay him $100 or a couple $100, however much his class costs. Basically, I don't know if you've ever seen those ads online, the master class, where they have all these celebrities, Neil Gaiman, that dope from Rage Against the Machine, the faux Marxist, I forget, Tom Morello, I think. He teaches you to play guitar, the guy on Project Runway, but basically all of these celebrities, and you pay them, you enroll in their online class, the quote-unquote master class, and you learn how to do their job. Supposedly, it kind of reminds me of these learning annex magazines you would see in these the newspaper bins in places like Manhattan. You would take these learning annex courses where you would, learn acting from the professionals. But that's basically what he was saying. He was saying, I'm not even going to discuss this in a public setting without you paying me money, because it's so embarrassing, it's so humiliating to Islam. And I don't know how many people have emphasized this point, but the fact that this is a good illustration of the difference between Islam and biblical Christianity, between how Islam operates and how Bible-based Christianity operates. Because in a legitimate church that doesn't preach a false gospel, everything is set out clearly, because in the Bible, in the inspired word of God, these things are enunciated very clearly. There's nothing that's hidden. Now, there are some things that aren't revealed. There are certain things that haven't been revealed. For example, we don't know what his physical appearance looked like, beyond certain things, certain minor characteristics like having a beard, and that he wasn't he wasn't handsome, or he didn't have um, uh, a very magnificent physical appearance. But beyond that, we don't know what he looked like. Of course, there's certain things about heaven that are not revealed, but there's nothing about the gospel or about the nature of salvation that is hidden. It's all very clearly and cogently explained in the Gospels and in the Pauline epistles, and the history of God's relationship with Israel and the reasons for punishment of sin. These are all things that are very clearly explained and attainable to anyone who opens up the Bible and is guided by the Holy Spirit. They can understand these things. You don't need to spend $100 or $200 or $1,000 in order to obtain these secrets, because they're not secrets. They're just plainly revealed. And like I said, you're able to apprehend them. Just any ordinary person who's guided by the Holy Spirit is able to apprehend these concepts. Whereas Islam, like every other cult, although it's significantly bigger than most cults, everything is occluded and veiled and is a mystery. Now, in the Bible, there are mysteries. There's the mystery of godliness. There's the mystery of iniquity. But there's no mystery about salvation or how God responds to sin. There's no mystery to these core elements of faith. Although there are some things such as the Trinity, such as how God can dwell on earth. There are some things that are difficult for limited human reasoning to understand. But there really is no mystery in the sense of unsolved mysteries. There's no veil over central truths and doctrines in the Bible having to do with soteriology and relating to God. Whereas in Islam and in other cults like Scientology or the Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormonism, all of these things are clouded in darkness. They're hidden. They're not really revealed, and you're not allowed to question this aspect of the religion. And it's antithetical, really, to true religion to say you're not allowed to ask questions. God, in Isaiah, God says, "Let us reason together," and He communicates with the prophets. He communicates, starting with Abraham, all the way through the New Testament, to the point where His Son actually, to the first Advent, where Jesus actually communicates with ordinary people. You don't have to be a prophet or some special individual in order to receive knowledge and wisdom from God. But in Islam and all of these cults, these false gospels, you have the very essence of God shrouded in mystery. And the reason is because they're built on falsehoods. And that's the issue with Yasser Qadhi. He was essentially defending his reputation. He wants to maintain this reputation as both an Orthodox Muslim, an Orthodox Sunni Muslim, but at the same time wants to present an image, an appealing image to Western academics, to his colleagues who are non-Muslims. So he wants to have his cake and eat it too. And that was frustrating to Muhammad Hijab, who's basically an Ali G character come to life. He's not, he doesn't have the sophistication, or maybe sophistication is the wrong word. Maybe he's not as crafty in dissimulation, despite being a Muslim apologist. He's not as clever in dissimulating and wearing different masks for different audiences. He just wants to come across as a loudmouth, obnoxious, very militant Muslim, and kind of a keyboard jihadist. He doesn't understand the dance that people like Yasser Qadi have to do in order to be accepted in non-Muslim academic circles, and to maintain this sort of reputation. But anyway, those are just a few of the thoughts I had on the Qadi Hijab encounter. I think this would be the first and last video I do on this subject, although I might talk about Muhammad Hijab later. I was actually discussing this with someone a few days ago, the concept that he himself has some mental issues, and I don't know if it's indicative of a deeper spiritual turmoil, but it would be interesting if he's just, because he seems to have lost the plot, even for him, someone who has a reputation as this thuggish, semi-literate keyboard jihadist. Even he seems to be unraveling a little bit. But oh yeah, Reza Aslan, David Wood actually made a funny video about this when his CNN show, which I don't even think lasted 1 year, it was basically I don't know how to describe it precisely, but I would characterize it as a brain-dead version of Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown, the CNN series where he just went to different countries and sampled their cuisine. And that was actually probably the only show on CNN actually worth watching. It was basically a travelogue where he would eat and talk about the cuisine, but also talk about the culture. He went to different places like Vietnam, all throughout Southeast Asia. I think he went to Cuba. But that was actually a fascinating show, which is a rarity in CNN. But this was kind of like that, only brain dead, and rather than focusing on food, it focused on religion. And he went to a part of India where there are cannibals, basically people who eat flesh, the flesh of the deceased, or and let's see, what are they? The Varanasi is also the central home of the Agor, a tiny sect of Hinduism that has become known for its practice of eating human flesh. So yeah, he went to this part of India where they eat human flesh, and he ate the brains of a deceased human being. And David Wood did a funny and amusing video about this, just mocking him with all of these clips of Hannibal Lecter scenes from The Silence of the Lambs spliced in. But yeah, I mean, Reza Aslan is just a. I don't even know if I would call him a Muslim apologist, as just a ridiculous publicity seeker, and kind of the perfect, kind of the avatar for CNN. Although I don't think he works there any longer, but he was the perfect uh, poster boy for that network, which is completely bereft of any sort of valuable information or news gathering. It's just utter schlock and worthless propaganda, which is Reza Aslan's forte. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but I will get off. Hi, Diane, and I just want to thank everyone who tuned in and who tune in the future. And I will see you next time. Have a happy Independence Day.